Hello, thank you for joining me for another techniques video. This one is going to be all about water and lakes and getting that sort of wavy, lakey look. That's a really bad description, but essentially that's what it's going to be about. I've been doing a lot of water over the last little while in my travel journal, so you can see this kind of wavy look that I have here. In this piece here, again, sort of a wavy look. And then here, this one's kind of awkward because it's sort of a split one, but we've got some waves here as well. So I've done what I did in the last one, the clouds technique video, where I've already pre-drawn some things to save us a little bit of time. But this one is going to take a little bit longer than the clouds one just because there's a lot more layering that goes into it. So yeah, we'll just get started. I'll post a picture that I'm using for reference here. You can tell that the water is quite choppy. There's a lot of little waves that happen. In the distance, there's sort of some strips of darker blue. You can see I've kind of avoided putting a little island in there just because I didn't want to put it in there. So I left that out, which is the luxury of travel sketching. You can kind of decide to remove things if you want to. I decided to remove that. Okay, so we're going to start out. I've already done a little bit of pencil drawing in here, but I'm going to add a little bit more to that. So basically, there's not really any right or wrong way to do water because it is quite organic and flowy and you can kind of get away with anything. But you want to keep everything that you do for the most part horizontal. So obviously there's not going to be any like marks in this direction because that doesn't make sense for the natural flow of water, at least not in this setting. Maybe some places it does. You can do like sort of sideways U's and connect them, do a few sideways U's, and that gets that look of the peak of the wave there. But you want that to be near the front when you do these more defined shapes, because obviously things are in better detail when they're up front, things are larger when they're closer to you. And so then as you go further back, you're going to make these little waves smaller and less defined. So it'll just be little bits. And then that kind of gives you that feeling of distance and space within it. And then I'm going to take my Faber-Castell Pitt pen. You can skip this step if you don't want that outlined look, but I prefer that. So then I'm just gonna make some final decisions with this and commit to some of these little waves. It looks really harsh at the moment, but once you get color on there, it's gonna look a little less harsh. And in water, you can see that there's some shadows that happen. So I'm going to put more black lining into where the shadows were, obviously, because it's going to be darker there. But you also get some strips of color in water. So sometimes it might be nice to line up these marks that you're making so that it kind of forms a bit of a current pattern, I guess, or I don't know how you would call that, but so they're not like evenly spread out. You know, water isn't quite that even. It's a bit more random. So yeah, so this is basically all I'm going to do for the pen portion, and I'm not going to erase any of these marks because it adds a good mid value to the water before you're even adding color into it. So I'm going to keep all of those marks that way. And then we're gonna break out the blue. So this is a bit of a unique coloring scenario because the Georgian Bay is such a beautiful, clear, turquoise type water. It does, you know, change a little bit if you're looking at a lake or if you're looking at a river. So this one, I'm going to use sort of a greenish blue undertone for some of these mid-tones up here. And then I'm going to use a bit of a darker blue for some of these areas out here. But basically, I'm just going to show you the method which I put it on, and then the color you can adapt for each body of water that you do. So again, I'm doing these strips of color, and I'm keeping things very horizontal. The white of the page is going to be your friend with this because there are a lot of highlights when it comes to water. So if you leave these big strips of white, it kind of gives that feeling of highlight. But we'll be building this up in layers anyways, so you'll get a chance to go back and change that if you're wanting to. So I'm just adding my first level of color at the moment, a very light wash of color, and then we're going to build this up. All right, so now the important part is to let this dry. At some points you want to interact with the wet paint while it's still wet on the page, but there's a lot of points where you just have to be patient and let it dry. For me, this is easy because I have a hairdryer. But obviously, if you're on location, this isn't going to be quite as easy and fast of a fix. But you're on location, you're in a beautiful setting, take 5-10 minutes and just enjoy the view and come back to this when it's dry. All right, so then the next layer, I'm gonna go for the far waterline. So I'm gonna take some of this dark blue. I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is Pebeo. I'll write it on the screen because I don't know. Gris de Pain, which is like a gray, technically it's a gray color, but it has a real blue tint to it. So I use this, I used it mixed with green for my far island there, and I use it by itself to get a beautiful distant blue color. It really just gives this feeling of that like distant object, or it's also a really good shadow color because it's not as harsh as black is. But yeah, okay, so I take that and I put it solidly all across the horizon line to get that feeling of that dark blue horizon in the water, and then I bring it down a little bit and I use small little strokes here because, again, remember, in the distance things are going to be smaller and less defined. So I bring it down in, and you even get some of that dark blue closer. There's a shadow here, so I'm going to use it to make that shadow. But you even get it further in as well in some of these shadows in the waves. So I'm going to take it and bring it all the way down. And that way you're tying all of these places in as well if you bring the colors all the way through. Some colors you're not going to be able to do that, but some of them you can. So I'll come in and I will darken this up a little bit more after the fact too, but I'm just gonna fix this a little bit. All right, so then we're gonna let this layer dry. And then I'm gonna go in with a greenish blue color. Oops, not brown. And this is gonna be closer. So I'm gonna do bigger washes of this because I wanna fill in some of this area quickly. And you can tell I'm not being particularly careful about where I'm putting things, apart from, you know, leaving a few white areas, which you can, if you do end up painting over the white areas, you can put them back in a little bit with your white gel pen. But I'm not being super careful because, you know, nature is really forgiving, it's random, it's chaotic looking sometimes, so you can get away with just kind of slapping the paint onto the page. All right, so that's that layer. Let it dry. And like I said, doing water takes a lot of patience because you have to do all of these layers. There's not really any skipping it, or you're not going to get the depth that you want. So I'm gonna go back in with this dark color, and don't worry about the color mixing, like the turquoise and this darker color mixing if you have some left on your palette still. They're mixing in the water anyways, so works to have them mixing in the palette too. Again, I'm just darkening up some of these areas. Darken them up until you're satisfied with the intensity of them. So that might even be a couple more layers, depending on what you're wanting to go for, how much shadow you have in the scene that you're looking at. So I don't like to go vertical at all, except for when I'm trying to get a bit of a border happening there. So you have to just be careful to not go too much with that, but you can get away with a little bit. You get a lot of more green tones kind of closer to the shore when you're getting closer to the stony bottom of the water. So I'm gonna add a bit more green here. And you even start to get a little bit of sort of a brown color too. So I'm gonna add a little bit of that in there to get that feeling of the stone floor. And you can just see I'm kind of just skating the tip of my brush along the paper, picking it up and really quickly making these motions. You can follow a little bit the black lines that you've been doing, but I don't find it super necessary to pay attention to those a lot. They all just kind of build and layer on top of each other as you're going. And again, you don't need to be so precise that it looks exactly like what you're looking at. It's the feeling of it, the atmosphere of it. So as I was going, it basically dried itself. So when you start adding some of these smaller, thinner layers, it's going to dry a lot quicker, so this process is a lot faster. But I'm going to add a bit more dark to these distant horizon lines. And you can see as each layer of paint goes on, it just gets more and more defined what you're looking at. Maybe you want to take away a few more of those little white areas, kind of close them in a bit more because it looks a bit too shiny, so you're just taking some of that away. Then you can totally do that. Get more green in here. So this blue is a Pabio, I don't know if I'm saying that right at all, Prussian blue, but it could be a cobalt. They don't really label the sides of their colors like Winsor Newton does. No, this isn't Winsor Newton. This green that I'm using is Core Olive Green. It's by Golden, the company Golden. And I've been really, liking the olive green tone with my stuff. But Winsor Newton does sap green, which is pretty comparable. It's a little bit more, a little bit brighter of a green. What am I wanting to do? Mix a little bit more of this blue in there, get a nice turquoise color, and then this is a bit of a greeny turquoise, but that's okay. I'm going to do another video on color mixing. I've had that request from a few people. So I'm going to do a color theory video and then a color mixing video at some point here. I'm waiting to do the color mixing and color theory until I get a couple more watercolor palettes that have exactly the colors that my workshop attendees have in their kit, so that I can directly reference what they have and what colors they have to work with to make life a little bit easier for them. So I'm going to wait until I get those before I do those color technique videos, because these aren't the colors that the workshop people get. I do recommend kind of, if you have like that set of colors, to you know, replace some of them with different ones, or experiment a little bit with different color companies with different colors and stuff. But I can do a video on recommendations later too, if that's something that you guys would like. All right, so I think I'll do a little bit more sort of brown color just up at the front here. Maybe add a little bit of black in there to get a bit of the shadow that is cast right at the front there. That layer's done. I'm gonna dry it. All right, and I think that I'm done with the watercolor portion. So now I'm gonna go in with my white gel pen, and I'm just gonna add a couple reflections in here and help make it pop a little bit. And I'm gonna do somewhat of the same technique as I do with the black pen. So sort of that U-shaped, sideways M shape look, where I'm following along in kind of these diagonal line type things. But again, don't be so consistent with it. You don't have to follow a consistent way of doing it as you're going, because waves aren't consistent. So you can figure it out and see what looks best in each individual piece that you're working on. All right. And then as I was doing this, I realized that this shore is getting a little bit lost, competing a little bit with the water. So I'm just going to add some more color in here. The color tones were just getting really similar to each other, so if you want something to stand out, you have to make sure that it's looking different, and it wasn't. All right, so I'm just going to write a description of where this is. And date it a little bit too. And then there you have it. There is my finished water scene. I'll put a picture of what the original photograph looked like up here so you can kind of reference a little bit what I'm looking at. And obviously it's not the same, but the goal is to get that feeling of the turquoise waters and the sun shining down and the distant tree lines and islands and things like that. And I think that I accomplished that with it. All right, so that's my basic how to do a water lake scene. This technique maybe doesn't apply to every water scene that you're going to be looking at, but it's a good basis to start from and to get a feel for the direction of water and the direction of highlights and shadows on water, and to just get a bit more comfortable with your watercolors. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope this helps you in your own travel journal journey and that you can use these techniques to help express your own trips and your own adventures in the future. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon. Bye.